On Saturday, I was in Asunción, in Paraguay, to sign the EU-Mercosur trade agreement. It was a breakthrough after 25 years of negotiations.
The European Union was once sold to the world as a bold promise. A continent that had torn itself apart twice in one century would finally choose cooperation over conflict, shared rules over raw power, and economic integration over nationalist rivalry. For years, that promise looked convincing. Borders softened, trade expanded, and the idea of being European slowly began to sit alongside national identity. But today, that promise feels more fragile than it has in decades. The European Union now stands at a crossroads, caught between internal fractures, external pressure, and a rapidly changing global order that no longer waits for Brussels to reach consensus. In recent months, headlines across Europe have carried a familiar but increasingly urgent tone. Protests in major cities, farmers blocking highways, workers striking over inflation, and voters drifting toward parties that openly question the value of EU membership itself. From France to Germany, from the Netherlands to Italy, political landscapes are shifting in ways that make EU leaders deeply uncomfortable. The rise of right-wing and Eurosceptic parties is no longer a fringe phenomenon. It is becoming a mainstream force that shapes elections, coalitions, and policy decisions. At the heart of this unrest lies a simple but powerful feeling. Many Europeans believe the system is not working for them anymore. Energy prices remain high even after emergency measures. The cost of living crisis has squeezed middle-class households that once felt secure. Farmers argue that EU environmental regulations are pushing them to the brink, while cheaper imports enter the market. Young people struggle with housing costs and unstable jobs, while older voters fear that social protections are slowly eroding. Brussels speaks the language of long-term strategy and green transitions, but everyday life feels more uncertain than ever. The war in Ukraine has further exposed the EU's strengths and weaknesses. On one hand, the Union showed an unprecedented level of unity by supporting Ukraine financially, militarily, and politically. Sanctions against Russia were coordinated at a scale few thought possible. On the other hand, the war revealed how dependent Europe still is on external powers for energy, security, and even critical raw materials. The sudden break from Russian gas sent shockwaves through European economies, forcing governments to spend billions just to keep households and industries afloat. For many citizens, this raised an uncomfortable question. If the EU is so powerful, why does it feel so vulnerable? Migration remains another issue that continues to divide the Union. Southern states feel abandoned as they deal with arrivals across the Mediterranean. Eastern countries reject mandatory relocation quotas. Northern governments face domestic backlash over integration and social cohesion. Every major migration surge revives the same debate, and every time the EU struggles to deliver a solution that feels both humane and politically sustainable. The result is a growing sense that Brussels can regulate markets better than it can manage people. Even inside the institutions, tension is growing. Smaller member states worry that decisions are increasingly driven by the interests of larger economies. Countries like Hungary and Poland have openly clashed with the European Commission over rule of law issues, turning legal disputes into political standoffs. Funds are frozen, accusations are exchanged, and the idea of shared values starts to sound more like a slogan than a lived reality. When unity becomes conditional, the entire structure begins to feel unstable. At the same time, the global environment around the EU is becoming harsher. The United States is more inward-looking and unpredictable than before. China is both a critical trade partner and a strategic rival. Conflicts in the Middle East and instability in Africa directly affect European security and migration flows. In this world, the EU wants to be a geopolitical actor, not just an economic bloc. But ambition alone is not enough. Power requires speed, clarity, and the ability to act decisively, qualities that a consensus-driven system often struggles to deliver. Technology and competitiveness add another layer of pressure. Europe lags behind the US and China in areas like artificial intelligence, big tech platforms, and venture capital. While the EU excels at regulation, it often falls short in innovation at scale. New industrial policies aim to change that, but they come with trade-offs. Subsidies risk fragmenting the single market. Protectionist measures invite retaliation. And once again, member states disagree on how far integration should go. Despite all this, Declaring the European Union a failure would be premature and simplistic. The EU still represents the largest single market in the world. It sets global standards in consumer protection, data privacy, and environmental policy. For smaller countries, membership remains a source of stability and influence they could never achieve alone. And in moments of real crisis, from the pandemic to the Ukraine war, the Union has shown that it can adapt in ways that once seemed impossible. The real question is not whether the EU will survive, but what kind of EU will emerge from this period of strain. Will it move toward deeper integration, with stronger central authority and faster decision-making? Or will it retreat into a looser arrangement, giving member states more control at the cost of collective power? Can it rebuild trust with citizens who feel left behind? Or will frustration continue to feed political movements that thrive on division? What makes this moment especially critical is timing. Demographic decline, climate change, and technological disruption are not distant threats. They are already reshaping societies and economies. Delay has a cost, and hesitation creates openings for others to set the rules. If the EU cannot align its internal debates with external realities, it risks becoming reactive rather than strategic. For ordinary Europeans, this debate is not abstract. It affects energy bills, job security, food prices, and the future their children will inherit. The idea of Europe was never meant to replace nations, but to protect them in a world where acting alone is no longer enough. Whether that idea can be renewed depends on leadership, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The European Union today is not collapsing, but it is under pressure from almost every direction at once. History shows that European integration has always advanced through crises. The difference now is that public patience is thinner, trust is weaker, and the margin for error is smaller. What happens next will not only define the future of Europe, but also send a signal to the world about whether cooperation can still compete with fragmentation in the 21st century. If you want, I can adapt this script for a YouTube news video, Facebook Reel, documentary narration, or add a stronger viral hook at the opening and closing without breaking the one-piece flow. Another layer of anxiety is quietly spreading across Europe. The fear that democratic control is slipping further away from ordinary voters. Turnout in European Parliament elections often remains lower than national elections, reinforcing the perception that EU-level decisions happen somewhere distant, negotiated by people most citizens will never meet. When policies fail or create backlash, national governments blame Brussels. When things go right, credit stays at home. This imbalance has slowly eroded accountability and trust, making it easier for critics to label the EU as an unresponsive elite project. Security concerns are also reshaping the debate in ways that were unthinkable just a few years ago. NATO has returned to the centre of European defence, while the EU struggles to define its own military role. Calls for a stronger European defence capability grow louder, yet agreement remains elusive. Some countries fear duplication, others fear loss of sovereignty, and many simply lack the political appetite to explain higher defence spending to voters already under economic stress. The result is a security architecture that depends heavily on external guarantees while aspiring to strategic autonomy. Economic divergence inside the Union is becoming harder to ignore. While some member states recover faster from recent shocks, others face stagnation, rising debt, and declining competitiveness. The single market was designed to reduce these gaps, but crises have widened them instead. Emergency funds and recovery packages help prevent collapse, yet they also created new tensions over fiscal responsibility and long-term reform. Wealthier countries worry about permanent transfers, while struggling economies argue that solidarity without conditions is an illusion. Climate policy, once seen as a unifying mission, is now a source of political risk. The Green Deal remains a flagship project, but its costs are increasingly visible. Industries warn of lost competitiveness. Workers fear job losses. Rural communities feel targeted by regulations designed far from their realities. While climate action remains popular in principle, resistance grows when sacrifices feel uneven or rushed. This creates space for political actors who frame environmental ambition as an enemy of economic stability. Still, beneath the noise and conflict, there is a quieter truth. Most Europeans do not want the Union to fail. They want it to function better, listen more, and protect them in tangible ways. The challenge for EU leadership is not just institutional reform, but narrative renewal. Citizens need to see how collective decisions translate into everyday security, opportunity, and fairness. The coming years will force choices that can no longer be postponed.